Welcome to the Hedgineer Podcast, hosted by Michael Watson.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hedgineer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Watson, where we talk about technology, data, and AI within asset management, hedge funds, and prop trading. And so for this week, we have Jason Strimpel coming on. He's the founder of PyQuant News, like a pythonista to the core, AI enthusiast. He posts a lot of really interesting stuff on both Twitter and in LinkedIn. And in this episode, we touched on a lot of really cool stuff. Like the stuff that hit home for me was we talked about how you should be talking about AI to your kids and what are the things that you have to have hard conversations on that you didn't really have to bring up maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Jason has this really cool quote that you need to start talking about your kids on 3 things now, and it's drug, sex, and AI. And it really resonated with me as a new parent. We then touched on a couple things I thought were really fascinating around the simplicity of the Agentic Loop, which is the framework in which a lot of the agents that are getting deployed now are using, and trying to simplify it a little bit more in layman's terms, although we did get pretty technical. And lastly, we touched on this really cool concept that he and I were iterating on, where the evals are the product, where if you can demonstrate with a robust set of evaluations that an agent is able to solve a problem space, whether that is producing research or classifying a piece of text as a certain transaction type, or solving an accounting problem, or building a sales pitch, or replying to a client, regardless of the problem space, that if you can have a robust set of evaluations that is the product, and it demonstrates that you have a system that harnesses this intelligence to be able to farm it out across a broader problem space in production. It was a great conversation. Jason was an absolute joy to chat with, and I can't wait until he comes back in New York. So with that, hope you guys enjoy it. We first met in person at the I don't know, what was the name of the conference that we were at a week ago?
Like quant dev or AI quant dev. AI quant dev, we're all in there somewhere.
Right. And we were both on a panel, and you said a couple things that really resonated with me. And it was actually more about when you were talking about your kids, and you need to talk about 3 things now: drugs, sex, and AI. And I have a 1-year-old daughter, and I'm thinking through, like, how would I explain, like, no, that teddy bear that you're talking to, it's not real. It's a artificial intelligence. It's not human. And my wife and I were just chit-chatting around, like, how would we even start that conversation? And luckily we don't have to have it for, I don't know, a couple of years, but you're probably in the thick of it. Like, where'd you come up with that little slogan? But I'm sure you spent more time thinking about it than I have. How do you talk to your kids about AI?
Yeah, I came up with it. I was doing a talk, just a really impromptu thing. I was at a networking event, about 50 people, and somebody just asked me to start talking about AI, like more the philosophical level rather than the technical level. And as I was talking, I'm like, yeah, you gotta start talking to your kids about this stuff. And the genesis was really a friend of mine whose son is like, I don't know, 12 or 14, and he wants to be a pilot. And the son asked the dad, like, will a pilot still be a thing? Like, am I going to be able to be a pilot, or are robots going to take over flying planes?
Yeah.
And that like shook my friend, and he was talking to me about this. And then that's where I kind of came up with, like, how do you talk to your kids about the important things in life, and, sex and drugs. And now it's like AI as well. And I mean, I don't have an answer yet. And I think I said that on the panel, like, I've got kind of an 80% half-baked theme that I can kind of talk about, but I haven't really figured it out. So my son is 7, my daughter is turning 5. So I have some time as well, but it's starting to get to the point where, my kids are like taking pictures, holding the person in the picture, like highlighting the human and then printing out the picture, which is not exactly AI, but it's advanced technology. And these kids are like growing up with it. It's pretty amazing to watch, and yet kind of nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah. And Sora 2 came out this week, and I downloaded it on day 1. And I don't know if it was done, but the first thing I did, scan your picture, look left, look right, say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then select my avatar and create a prompt. And it just starts like taking a picture of me doing that thing. And there's tons of stuff out there. And so you really quickly start to lose a bit of a disconnect between like what's real and what's not, and how dangerous that is. And one, we're assuming that you and I understand the difference. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but for a kid coming up right now, it's going to be challenging, and they're going to have to ask questions that we never had to really contemplate at an early age. I was chatting with my wife about it. I was like, hey, so this guy, Jason, that had this really interesting quote. You didn't talk to your kids about drug, sex, and AI. And I asked her, like, hey, so what are we going to talk to Liv about? And we chatted on it. And one of the things I was thinking is like, so do I have to describe what being a human is and what not being a human is? I think we've always taken that for granted, but I think that might be a conversation that you have to have, that like mommy and daddy, we are humans and we have parents, and your doll, although you can talk to her, she isn't a human in the same way that we are. And that's something that you need to kind of understand and appreciate and realize the difference between the two. And
more like just, now it's like you just gave the Sora example. You've got these life-like avatars that are the human. I mean, is it any less human than a video of me on my iPhone talking to you and then showing my kid? Like, is it the same as you typing a prompt into the Sora window and then having the machine generate a picture of you talking? Is that the same or is that different? And then if your kid is looking at an AI generated video of you talking, like, what does that do to them? Like, is that my dad? Is that not my dad? It looks like my dad, but it's not my dad. Like, his voice sounds different. Yeah. And this is the kind of stuff that we got to start thinking about as we figure out how to talk to our kids about this. It's weird. But here, let me ask you, Michael. So like when our parents were our age, they're like, oh, TV, like, video games. I got to talk to our kids about video games. Like they're sitting there. Is this the same or is this different?
I mean, I think there's similarities. I think for me, when I think about the similarities are somebody else can control a narrative and influence my perception of reality and control that information at scale. And I just need to be aware of the possibility that other people are trying to influence me to do things that are not as obvious as it seems, and be aware of that kind of like mass communication tool that people can use to influence me. And with games and TV, you suddenly have this mechanism to increase that channel of influence, which is more than radio, which is more than the written word and the Guggenheim printing press. All of those kind of tools were mechanisms of information dissemination that can be used by some third party to influence me. And I think that at each technological revolution, the efficacy of that medium to transfer information and influence the listener, the observer, becomes more and more effective. And so I think that, to your point, it's not different. It's just more effective than the previous version. Because now if you can have a picture of like mommy and daddy and they're saying something that isn't actually our intended message, and it's coming from somebody else that has a different intent than what my intentions for them are, can be used in a manipulative way. And being aware of that and knowing the skills in the way to be able to differentiate the two, I think is just a fundamental thing that people are going to have to start to develop and be aware of. But yeah, it's a great point. I don't think it's necessarily fundamentally different than previous forms of media and communication.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. I think I agree with that, and I'm going to start to dwell on that and adopt that as I think about that, because it's like happening faster in a more compressed timeline, and it's more potent and more robust and more realistic. And it can be used for good or evil. And it's up to us to help our kiddos distinguish the difference.
So it's rare. And so I like to think that I'm using it for good. And I'm sure you are too. So like you're spending a lot of time on applied AI and deploying AI within the enterprise. What are you right now spending your time on in terms of you using this new intelligence, this new tool for good?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think for me personally, it's all about like, I call it kind of micro productivity. I think people kind of that are new to this whole bucket of technology think that there's like one lever you pull and then you're like 5x more productive. I think in reality, it's like 30 levers that you pull, and each lever gives you an incremental productivity boost of 5%, something like that. So when I'm writing emails to clients, I have like a prompt that I use to put my emails through that gives me like a very precise language and call to action and all this kind of stuff, makes it very consistent. So that's just one example. So instead of using like brain part 1 to write the email and then brain part 2 to edit the email or document or whatever, I just cut that in half. I just write the document and then I use the AI stuff to just edit it. That's for me. Obviously coding, it's a huge help. Debugging code. I am not a vibe coder. I've been writing code for close to 20 years. So I've benefited from having that deep intuition of how code works. I'm not just dumping nonsense and getting code out. Like I know, as you probably do too, what's good, what's bad. I think like building infrastructure, building Terraform scripts, building CloudFormation scripts, getting help when your IAM roles on AWS are broken, like all of this kind of stuff that you used to have to dig through documentation for. Now it's like, I just dump a 300-line CloudFormation script in ChatGPT. I'm like, why is IAM giving me this error? And it's like, here, do these 3 things. So as far as the personal productivity thing and like the teams I run, as far as the development of that stuff goes, I think it's a huge boost. As far as enterprises, that's a much trickier question. You know, I think that not many, generically speaking, enterprises are as advanced as folks might think they are. A lot of companies, organizationally, culturally, are still trying to get their heads around how to use this stuff effectively. We're beyond the point where executives are wondering whether it can be used in their business. That was kind of 2023, 2024. Now it's like, okay, I know the power of this, but how do I apply it to my business? And the way that I'm thinking about this, maybe we can get into that later, but to more answer your question, like, what are we actually doing? I would say the most advanced stuff that we're doing is in the agentic side, which I think is probably pushing the boundaries of where we are. So, you've got agentic loops that just kind of loop through and call tools and try to accomplish goals. And then at the same time, you are bringing in prompts. So like prompt engineering, the agentic loops, I think the combination there is where we're finding most effective use of at least the language model stuff. Putting in reasoning loops, of course, and then we talked about MCP in New York, Michael, but I think that combination is where we're seeing some of the most advanced stuff.
Totally. I mean, I building on the agentic loop, I think that the frameworks like Claude just renamed the Claude Python Claude Code SDK to just the Claude Agent SDK is really demonstrating the power of the agentic loop. It's a very, very simple model. You have a language model, and then you have a loop where the tools are basically a bash shell and different tools that you can register within it. And you put context in, you give it a set of tools, you let it run in that loop, and then the model determines when it wants to exit. And that kind of just core substrate is really taking off. And it's a pretty powerful concept. It's just pretty simple. Once you kind of like get into it, it's just looping and determining when it wants to exit based off of its own logic. And being able to use that general concept in different scenarios, like you can use it to, when you get an email, send context, give it tools, have it run in the loop, do some work, and then and exit. Or You have an Excel model. You want it to parse it, send it into the loop, give it some tools, give it some context, let it loop, and then it's done. Or you want to go and do some sort of like action. Basically, the agentic loop, I guess, is what I'm getting at, is the core substrate of all of the agentic frameworks right now. And I see at least some momentum right now of starting to have like the common layers and components of building out more complex systems starting to emerge. And it's definitely a really time to be building, for sure.
It's absolutely an incredible time to have the capacity and experience to put this stuff to use. We're talking in New York, and you weren't talking to me or talking to somebody else, but I was listening, and I think that the LLM, the brain, if you will, is, if not already, it's becoming a commodity, right? We're converging to like an upper bound of this generation's level of what what somebody might call intelligence. They're all starting to kind of converge. And now you're seeing the model providers build tools around the core model, which to me demonstrates this kind of lack of step change improvement. And there's a CapEx question there, like, are you going to spend another $10 billion to get 1 point higher on the benchmarks? That's another question. But what you're starting to see is this proliferation of tools. And this is the same story that we saw with like a web server, right? Like, you used to have some sort of competitive advantage based on the hardware that you were running in your data center to run your application. Very quickly, that no longer became a competitive advantage. Facebook open sources their server design, right?
Mm-hmm.
Models are already early source. So now the next layer underneath the model itself, or what you're calling the substrate, which is the infrastructure, the components to make that stuff work at scale. Mm-hmm. It's like super easy to spin up your Jupyter notebook and run LangChain. It's super easy to package everything up in a container and maybe deploy it to like a remote server. It's really hard to get that stuff running on cloud primitives, cloud native software in a large organization in a way that can be maintained and used. And as soon as that tooling becomes more mature, then I think you're going to start to see these agentic workflows proliferate. And that's when we will become that kind of substrate where you launch a new stack. You're not launching like your web server to host your SaaS app. You're literally launching the thing that runs your agentic loops.
Yeah. And you see some of that starting to come out of the hyperscalers. Like Agent Core came out of AWS, and it's meant to be a long-running Lambda for the execution of an agentic framework. And they originally came out with integrations with LangChain and Crew AI. But with the tight relationship between AWS and Anthropic, I think the very next thing that they're going to be supporting is the Claude Agent SDK. Microsoft is going to be coming out with the same thing. You're going to see like GCP coming out with something similar. Then you're going to likely start seeing some of the model providers coming out with hosting environments for these tools, because it is a huge driver of token consumption. A significant portion of the token consumption within Anthropic is coming through Claude Code. And you saw Sama pushing the adoption of Codex, and that's driving more token consumption. And so the natural extension of using some of these agentic loops that right now are developer tools, but taking that same environment, running it server side, you can start farming that out, and it makes it really easy to start scaling up that token consumption, because you're making it really easy for developers to mimic the workflow that they're working in locally, host that remotely, and then put a simple REST API in front of it. And now you can start farming out these agentic loops that you can get working effectively, but it's kind of hard to scale it. The hyperscalers and the model providers are going to start providing that native tooling to make it easy, and just because it's naturally driving token consumption. And
definitely,
that's one of the challenges right now. Like when you're building kind of some of this stuff, is determining how much of this you want to build versus how much you want to just wait for the hyperscalers. When I say hyperscaler, AWS, GCP, Azure, and the model providers, mainly Anthropic and OpenAI, maybe Mistral, to provide this infrastructure for you. And it's kind of like our kind of philosophy is like, let's get what we need to get done in order to get it working today, but let's not try to harden it such that this has to be the framework we have to use because we already put too much CapEx in it internally and we're pot committed because Agent Core is going to be supporting natively the Claude Agent SDK within 2 months from now.
It's a tough choice. I mean, the whole game of allocating capital is different. Like you're talking about driving token consumption. Yes, but there's negative economies of scale on every token, right? The unit economics of like token consumptions are upside down. So that's a weird end game to me. Like, what is OpenAI's end game if every token consumed, they're losing money on? Like, every million tokens they're consuming, they're losing money on, especially on the one-off for frontier models. Like, I don't know when those economics go the right side for these providers. The winners obviously are the GPUs. Like NVIDIA wants to see all of this token consumption because that is just hosting massive models and 200,000 GPUs. But it's still unclear to me what this end game looks like for these model providers. They are burning hundreds of billions of dollars of capital. I'm saying burning, maybe that's a little bit harsh, but they're consuming hundreds of billions of dollars of capital for a business model that's upside down. And like at some point, the laws of economics are going to pop the bubble. So I don't know when that happens. So even in that context, figuring out how to allocate capital, and you as a founder trying to figure out, you said to me, you are looking for very, very specific experience and skill set of your engineers, which I would consider rare and extremely valuable. So your constraint is A, talent, B, the time where you're pointing this scarce time talent. And if you're going to point them at some LangChain framework, and then in 3 months, AWS comes out and just eats that entire thing, you as a capital allocator have to figure out either, are you going to eat the technical debt? Are you going to, operate on some infrastructure that might not be optimal? Like, what do you do? So I think my point is, I think the game of allocating capital is now different, right? Whereas before you could always rely on better, faster, cheaper, Moore's law, AWS keeps collapsing prices. Everything collapses on a marginal basis. Now it's different. And I think for you as a business owner, for other people that are running these types of businesses, that's a very serious consideration that they have to have, how they have to think about this change.
Oh, totally. And it's there's also a question of like, if you are trying to deploy capital for the purposes of creating some sort of software moat, does that moat even exist even after you choose the right underlying infrastructure? Because it only takes one employee to leave that understands how the machine was built to be able to spend half an hour with prompt and taking all of their notes and recreating 80 to 90%. And so the software moat in terms of capital allocation, if that's the expected thing that's on the other side, is also really difficult to defend at the same time. And so it's for the way that you pointed, one of the things that we think about a lot is how do we have as much human capital expertise on the domain that we're working on, and saying that as long as we can retain that is at least a moat that we can continue to operate profitably, effectively, add significant value to our customers. And hopefully that expertise within the human capital, like our amazing team, can collectively create knowledge, software, experiences for our clients that allow them to be wildly successful when they work with us. And thinking through, maybe that's not an end game where I'm trying to lock them into an ARR multiple, where they have to use our software, otherwise the system doesn't work. And I think that not having that as an ulterior motive from a business, because we don't, right? Like right now, our clients do get a perpetual royalty-free license to everything that we build. And our product is rapid innovation. And it's the experience of having that rapid innovation by working with a team of experts that really understand asset management, hedge funds specifically, cross asset class, both fixed income, equities, structured products, some exotics, and how that whole trading and research and risk and fund management and investor relations workflow sits together. And what we sell is the experience of working with expert technologists and people that are living and breathing with how to get the most out of AI every day, and what type of innovation you get by working with us, and like almost selling an experience more so than selling a product that is trying to lock you in and force you to be on a platform with high migration costs that you're not going to be able to get out of. It feels, at least like it feels great to be selling that. Sometimes we get pushback. Well, what is your justification for your long-term equity value, and what is your moat and your lock-in that if somebody buys you that they're buying some IP? I think that I question that. Like, I think that's a legitimate question. I don't always have like a perfect long-term answer, but I do know that what we're creating right now, our clients love, and we are solving like real problems where they say like, hey, like what you're enabling us to do is something I don't know how we could get that anywhere else. And then for me as a business person, like that's what I want to hear, and that's the experience that I want to provide. I just then have to figure out how do I package that all up into something that someday, long time in the future, is really valuable to somebody else other than just me and our clients. But right now, like the way that we've started the business, we never raised outside capital. We've been able to fund ourselves through the goodwill of our clients, paying us for the services and the software that we build and provide, and using that to be able to grow and finance a company. We now have like 20 people globally, like headquarters in the middle of Midtown, 300 Park, small team in Bangalore. They're awesome. And just building stuff that people love. And it's fun, man. It's good.
Well, I mean, I think you said, how do you justify your long-term equity value? It's like, this space is moving at light speed. And you've got some fund manager who's in the business of structuring credit products, not thinking about how to read documents and parse covenants through an AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the way I kind of see my job is, in my day job, I'm managing director of AI and advanced analytics at a 30,000 person consulting firm. So the way I think of my job is I'm almost a translator. And it sounds terrible because like you never want a translator, but executives and business people, they're not in the business of running technology necessarily. They're in the business of running their business. Yeah. This pace is impossible for any one person to follow. Yet, you and me are probably 1, 2, 3, 4 steps behind, sprinting the marathon. And not only are you aware and familiar with the technology, but you know how to apply it to the domain in a way that drives competitive advantage for the business. And if that's true, then your advantage is the speed at which you can deploy and bring to bear these new technologies in a way to drive value for your customer. And, the people, I obviously this generic people, but like I get into these conversations around AI is just another technology. It used to be the data lake and it used to be big data. And there's a couple differences. Like difference number one is the hype cycle here is like compressed to microseconds, right? Just this week, how many announcements did Anthropic come out with? Like last week, OpenAI, the week before, Quen and DeepSeek, and all these models are coming out. So everything is just compressed, and businesses don't make decisions this fast. They make decisions this fast. So you've already gone through 5 hype cycles before they're even like back to the first. Second, like this is not just another technology. This is actually opening up the aperture of business problems that can be solved. Like this is a net new add into the world, and we're seeing new pockets of value within businesses that are being unlocked because we have this new technology. But business people are not always on the lookout for these new pockets of value on the tails of the distribution. So I see your job, I see my job to go in and uncover these pockets of value, having the expertise in the technology and the experience in the domain. And then you can attack these net new business problems with this new technology. And I think those new pockets of value are exceptionally valuable. This is not just incremental improvement. just a step change improvement in the way businesses operate because of the potency of this new technology. So that's how I communicate it to people. And I'm not here to deliver you a technology solution. I'm here to uncover new business problems and improve the way you operate your business, save you money, grow your revenue, whatever that might be. And for you, I think it's the same story.
Oh yeah, 100%. Um, the the parallels that I think both of us have is that we both came up at a time, early like 2010s, like late 2000s, when Python was really starting to emerge as this wonder drug when it came to technology that was having its tentacles go in all these different directions. Like, I did my first intro. Well, I did Python in high school, but then our intro to computer science had just switched from C++ to Python in 2006. And the professor said, like, hey, we've been doing some surveys, and I think it's going to be a little bit more approachable based off of some of the examples we've seen to do our intro class in Python than in C++. And you guys are going to be the experiment. And
Lovely.
it was probably one of the most impactful things that any educator made that had an impact on the trajectory of my life. I basically, if in my 20s, if you were talking to me at a party, there was a, I don't know, 70% chance I was going to try to steer the conversation to something about Python. And it became
Those are super popular.
yeah. Oh yeah, I had a couple friends.
Here, let me tell you about lists and list comprehension.
Oh, 100%. Or like, hey, I just saw this amazing talk by Raymond Hedgineer.
Yeah.
And let me tell you what happens when you import this. But you were actually, for a long time, somebody that I kind of followed. I followed along with because you started the PyQuant newsletter. And that kind of took on a life of its own. So I know we've talked a lot about like where the future of technology is going, but it's kind of fun to like look back on where we've been for people that kind of have the war rooms. And you were kind of like an influencer. You still are. Not trying to say you're past your prime, because I think there's a lot of good things to come. But how did you start the PyQuant newsletter?
Wow, great question. Thanks for asking. So it kind of came from early 2000 teens-ish. I was just like, you get obsessed with stuff, right? And I was getting like totally obsessed with programming and quant. And I was just obsessed with, like, I had a passion for collecting research papers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was bookmarking all these things. And I'm like, what if there was an easier way to share what I'm bookmarking with the world? This is like the era of Delicious. Do you remember?
Yeah, and Dig.
Right. And so Delicious like shut down. And I'm like, what am I going to do with all my lace? So I created a WordPress site, super simple WordPress site, and I would go in and I would post it, and I linked it up to Twitter. So anytime I posted something on WordPress, it would just be like a link and like 3-sentence description of why I liked it, and it would go to Twitter. I started that in 2015, and I did it like a couple times a month, like muscle memory, for 7 years until 2022. And then all of a sudden I look up in my Twitter feed. I'm like, oh, I got 5,000 followers on Twitter. What if I like actually focused on putting some energy into this? And I had like taken a writing course and like started to see all the creators, it was like the time of creators and like COVID and all that. I'm like, what if I like started to put some energy into this thing and see what happens? And I started putting some energy into it, got tons of, and in fact, this is how I met DDA, right? So I had DDA Lopes of OpenBB. I had like 16,000 followers on Twitter. I did a long form thread on OpenBB, and it went hyper viral for like 5 days. There was like 15 million impressions. I 2x'd my follower count. And DDA is like, why are my servers crashing? Like, why is all this traffic coming to the OpenBB website? And it's from me. So he like reached out and we started chatting, and that's how we met, because like I did some hyper viral thread. And that like started the trajectory. So in June of that year, I launched an ebook. I took some code from my master's degree. I have a master's degree in quantitative finance, like talking through derivatives pricing. And I like showed people how to do derivatives in Python. sold it for $8, made a bunch of money. I'm like, there's signal here. And then towards the end of 2022, I launched a course to teach people how to use Python in quant finance and algorithmic trading. And the gap that I kind of saw there was like, you try to approach quant or you try to approach trading, and there's like this barrier because of the jargon, and it's just very intimidating to get into this stuff. And I'm like, it's not that intimidating. Like, you don't have to overcomplicate this. So I started teaching people how to use Python for quant. And through that journey, I started the PyQuant newsletter as like a way to add value to people on my list. And I will be publishing the 168th weekly newsletter of the PyQuant newsletter on Saturday, tomorrow. So it's been 2.5-ish years of weekly publication. And I don't know if you've seen it, it's like basically Python tutorials. Like tomorrow, I published how to backtest a low vol equity factor strategy, right? So this is the type of thing that comes out. You can copy and paste the code. And it's like, I've had various jobs, some of where I'm coding, some of where I'm not, but I want to stay sharp and I want to stay on the cutting edge. And this is a great excuse to do that.
Awesome, man. So how did you learn Python? Like, where did it all begin?
Yeah, I was on computers pretty young. My dad, typical story. My dad was a computer guy, so I was like in front of a PC pretty early on. In my teenage years, like early '90s, I was on the internet, messing around with PHP, messing around with web servers. So I was like, building basic, Apache web servers on a Linux box, exposing on my network, like looping through a database table with PHP, and like it was blowing my mind. So I was kind of into programming, more C, C++. I got into MATLAB pretty early as well because I was doing statistical computing for undergrad. Then I took a computational finance course in my master's degree, which I thought was going to be a MATLAB, but it was in Python.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. I got out of my master's degree. I'm like, I'm not paying $2,500 a year for MATLAB. I'll just use Python.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was like 2011. So I've been a hardcore Python fanboy for about 15 years now.
Nice, man. So you went through the hard migration of 2 to 3 then. How long did it take you to switch to 3?
Longer than it should. Yeah, I think that's when it's true phrase. Late. It turned off 2.7 because that's what everybody was on, right? 2.7. I'm like, what is this? I have to change the way I think about the world. Yeah, now they dropped like the global interpreter lock, I think, on the latest version. So you just got to relearn it every time, right? And that's kind of the beauty, and the beauty of this space is you have to keep learning and be curious. Otherwise, you just fade away.
Totally, man. I was talking to my team, and I'm starting to see some people like this analogy, some didn't. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Is some parallels between using Python in like the early 2010s versus using AI in 2022, both in production systems? Because back when Python was starting to emerge as more than just a scripting language, you would hear graybeards, and I don't mean that in a negative way, although it kind of comes out with it, saying that like, how can you rely on this interpreted language where you don't really know what the variable type is? You don't really know what's going on with the memory. You don't really trust the system when you run it, and the databases are changing. Like, if the actual types are consistent, you're basically passing on this responsibility that you should have as an engineer to a black box system and just hoping that it interprets what you want to be correct. Like, who in their right mind would trust duck-typed language to manage a production system when you don't really know what's going on under the hood? And it's almost this leap of faith that you have to take once you give up that control of the machine when you start using these interpreted languages, that is not too dissimilar to pushback from not graybeards, but just people in general, where how can you trust this language model in this interpretation of a non-deterministic system to do the right thing and not know that it's going to go haywire in a production system? It seems like that would be crazy to make that leap of faith into this black box. And there's no way that I would ever build a system that has this non-deterministic, interpreted layer into a workflow. And a lot of times the pushback is sometimes the same. Like it might be, well, but you get this incredible performance boost in terms of productivity. You get this incredible framework that has all of these integrations with all of these other systems. And the integrations are maybe a little bit different, where Python has an incredible third-party ecosystem. Language models kind of integrate with anything with a REST API or an open API spec or some sort of programmatic interface that it can learn from. So the performance in terms of developer productivity and the integrations of different systems and the flexibility of the language, where Python, you could do data science. It had the emergence of web servers. There was like old school Cherry Pie and like UWSGI and then Flask and then, Django before all of that. Then Fast API, and you had obviously the whole PyData stack, pandas, NumPy, scikit-learn, stats models. Now you're going into like the AI world with PyTorch, and you have like the server integrations with, like, you do all this crazy stuff with Tornado back in the day. AI suddenly has like, oh, but you have all these things you can integrate with. Like it makes it trivial to integrate with N8N or your Outlook server or your SharePoint site, or you can do all this automated parsing. That it's not the same. Like, I'm not trying to say it's like for like, but it's starting to rhyme with kind of that power that when you had this network effect in the Python ecosystem just kind of take off in the 2010s, feeling like the same thing that's happening right now with AI, but just at like such a larger scale. And the same type of pushback that it's this interpreted black box that you can get around with really good tests. You can get around with really good evals. Like you have to have better testing in Python because you don't have the strict typing. So you have to have more unit tests than you might otherwise need. Is the same thing that you're going to need with AI when it goes into production. So we need more evaluations and more scenarios that you're simulating before you push it into production, and make sure that the production version is the same. The production environment and runtime and context and models are the same as the evaluation, runtime, and context and models and tools. But it rhymes a little bit, doesn't it?
I think so. And there's like no right answer. When you were saying that, I was thinking of like all the floor traders that were like, how are you going to trade on a screen? You got to turn on a computer and click with a mouse, and you can't see the person's eyes and you can't smell their fear. And now look, like the floors are a relic. So I think it's valid complaints and valid arguments, but that doesn't stop the progress, or that doesn't stop the wave that's like washing over. I agree with everything that you said. I think and I'm obviously I'm a Python person and I'm an AI person. So I'm like all for the progress. But like the caveat here, I think what Python did lowered the barrier to entry for programmers. AI is lowering the barrier to entry to expertise, right? So now there's this additional angle, this additional human angle. If you've ever hired anybody before, if you've ever tried to hire a developer, like you see these CVs that have every single technology ever invented that this person is somehow an expert in because they touched it. That's very hard to parse, right? And I think now you've got this AI that can answer these questions for you. I can be a doctor for the day because I can go put my blood tests into some ChatGPT and like get the interpretation of it. That doesn't make me an expert. And I think like the barriers to entry are lower, which is great because more people can participate, but that also creates a lot of noise in the market for people that are trying to do this work. So for you, trying to hire the best possible talent, for me, trying to hire the best possible talent, even for your customers and your clients that are trying to hire the best possible firms, the barrier, or I should say the hurdle to prove to them that you've got that expertise is even greater, because there's just such a huge volume of people that can now work with this technology. It's great for adoption, but it creates its own kind of challenges. And it's something that we've got to go over. But yes, I agree. Like it's rhyming. It rhymes over and over. It's like the whole creative destruction. The old way goes out. The new way comes in. Everybody who's caught up in the middle of it, they are making all this noise, and rightfully so, because it's their way of life. It's their lifestyle. They've got to protect the way that they act. But if I was still operating on Python 2.7, I'd be in trouble. Or if I was still trying to go to the floor and trade, I'd be in trouble.
Yeah. Although I think you could still probably get pretty far with 2.7. I don't want to say he's the last person to abandon, but I definitely took long.
If you want to like roll your own pandas data frame, because for example, yes, you could probably make it with 2.7, but you probably be less productive.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that all this stuff is in Python, right? It's a Swiss Army knife. It's cross-domain. It's easy to use. It's highly effective. The ecosystem is enormous. I don't have to go roll my own ensemble model with C. I don't have to allocate memory for an array. That's great. I can be productive with the language instead of worrying about engineering like software, which is what I would immediately.
Totally. I was talking about this also with my team. We were kind of reminiscing. Did you ever use a library called PyCloud?
Nope, never heard of it.
It was the first time that I really used Python and the cloud together. It probably came out maybe 2013, maybe. And the team ended up getting acquired by Dropbox, which was also at the time probably one of the coolest Python shops in the industry, because when Drew at MIT built Dropbox for both Windows and Mac, and you could allow you to sync your files on a server, it was all in Python. Like underneath the first versions of Dropbox were all Python. And so one of the reasons why they acquired PyCloud is because they had this awesome serializer. But what was really cool about it is you could write a function and you would say, like, let's say def add AB return A plus B. And then you could decorate it with like at pycloud.cloud, and you could then call func.run or something like that. And what PyCloud would do seamlessly, now it's not that interesting, but they would then take that function, serialize it, run it within the equivalent of a Lambda. I don't think Lambdas were fully deployed then. Give you a dashboard, and you could then map it out locally. You say, oh, now I have this function .map, and you could pass in like 1,1 in a tuple, 2,2, 3,4, 4,4, and it's going to like add all or do all of that in the cloud, not on my machine. And that was the first time I was like, oh wow, that's kind of incredible. And then that same team ended up getting acquired by, they got acquired by Dropbox, and then they started using that same serializer in Spark when Spark started supporting Python, not when it was natively done with the data frame API. And so you could write Python, they would translate to the JVM. It's back when you would use Python with Spark, and they would actually serialize the Python objects inside the RDD, the resilient data, distributed data set. I don't know, RDD. Yeah. It's funny. I feel like all of Spark was built around the concept of an RDD. And I just said that. And I don't think I've heard the word RDD used in years.
Long time.
Yeah.
A long time.
Yeah.
It's like kind of brings back LA nightmares, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like that I never did much with Java until I had to debug Spark tracebacks. And then I'm like, dude, what's going on here? And Google was not as good as it was. Stack Overflow was pretty much all that you had, which is kind of crazy to say, like Stack Overflow is all that you had. But yeah. And anyways, the reason why I was getting back to PyCloud, sorry, we kind of went on a tangent, but
all right.
With the Claude Agent SDK, you basically the agent class that you can instantiate within Python now, and you can pass in the same parameters that you would use for the Claude Code SDK or like the Claude Code environment. They're basically one and the same thing. Anthropic just rebranded it. You say like, hey, this is the prompt I want to pass in. This is the current working directory I want to execute in. This is the tools I want to register. These are the allowed tools. These are the disallowed tools. This is the max number of turns that I wanted to do. And then you instantiate that agent object. You do agent.run or agent.query, and then it goes and kind of executes in that loop. And it runs all of my machine. But it's so obvious to me that the same way that PyCloud experience came to me in 2013, where you just said, oh, like, can you just do cloud run? And you could press comma, or you could add an argument, comma, remote, pass in my like AWS API key or like some parameter, or maybe you have that coming from the runtime, and then like, oh, I now run that agent loop, but it's running remotely. I was like, oh, can I kind of farm that out? And then maybe agent.map and pass in a bunch of tuples and send all of that out. Like, oh, can I take that same agent concept and put a REST API in front of it? So now I can allow somebody to just query that from wherever, throw OAuth in front of it. And that same kind of like very simple REPL loop running remotely with a trivial change of a parameter in the agent instantiation in Python, I think is going to start giving a lot of people that, oh, wow, kind of experience that I think I had the first time I was using PyCloud. It was really similar to Cloud Run within GCP. Basically, all of the hyperscalers have it, but having that now start being available to these agent loops, we're a couple months away from it, and some of these examples that you can just do with adding an additional parameter to both the Anthropic Agent SDK as well as the Open API one. Honestly, they're so similar. They're just these agentic loops. We're so close to just having have this takeoff moment from a DevOps perspective, and then the sky's the limit in terms of the people that understand how to basically use some of these frameworks, know what's going on under the hood, understand a domain, and just go to town and chop wood. And like I'm chopping it to me the analogy.
What an amazing, like you went all the way back to the PyCloud 2013, and now I'm with you, man. I think Andrew Ng says that product management is the new bottleneck because of how fast people can ship, right? I think also LLM ops, or whatever you want to call it, DevOps or ML ops, that process of getting stuff off a desktop into a production environment, there does not seem to be a lot of tooling to make that easy. Now, that said, like you could just spin up a fleet of containers in Kubernetes and have all your agents doing things and collect it back. But like you got to do all that manually. Yeah, experience describing does not yet exist. But like that makes me think, I don't know that compute. So in the PyCloud example, like I can imagine where you want to offload the compute off of your local machine onto a cloud environment. And that's back when, 128 megabytes of RAM might have been a lot, right? Or 2 gigs of RAM. The new MacBooks got 196 gigabytes of RAM, et cetera. So I wonder, like, if you offload that into the cloud, like what benefit are you getting? What I think the benefit that you're getting is not necessarily compute, but it's the interaction with the hundreds of cloud services that exist within your infrastructure. That's why I get excited. So like we do a lot of work with Palantir, and in Foundry, you can run your agent loops, and the tool set that you have are the applications within the Foundry environment, right? AWS is the same thing. You run your tool loops, you can create tools to call S3, RDS, batch, whatever, SageMaker. Like you can start to interact with these very powerful and potent tools inside that agentic loop.
Yep.
For me, that's where I'm going to get like, holy, I don't know if this is a family friendly show, but holy shit. Yeah. Like this is amazing. You deploy that to AWS. Now I'm calling 15 different services as tools in my agentic loop. I collect a response, bring it back to my local machine, or expose that through an API. That's going to be the wow moment for me.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially what we do right now. I mean, like that, like there's secret sauce. We're big into things like open telemetry, plugging that into that agentic loop, because right now, like the Claude Agent SDK, you can see everything, like every tool that it decides to do, every traceback for a tool call. There's even hooks into that. They've had the open telemetry integration for a while, but just capturing that by adding a parameter in the agent SDK, which is output, and do JSON stream. So you can kind of capture that as it goes. And then we're sending that out to an open telemetry endpoint called Phoenix, so that you can see like, oh, these are all the different jobs that are being run. We've been messing with Temporal for like the runtime orchestrator for the different agents, using an open source framework called Deep Eval for running the evaluations and all. And so you have all of your tests kind of defined. So it's kind of cool. Like we'll have like you run PyTest, and then all of your deep eval tests get run with within temporal. So it's like, hey, this is the container that it's going to execute it when we go to production. So let's run it with that in the evaluations. So we execute the agent test. We then get the results, evaluate that with deep eval, have all of that in open telemetry, then take that, pass those to Phoenix, which then collects all of these tests. And that's where you can see like, oh, we have like a 98% score across the 73 tests that we have here. And when we evaluate all the different experiments of this test, like this actually beats all the other tests that we have by 14%. Let's promote this version of this agent to be the production version, so you can then upgrade that and have that run in temporal. And so you have then a way to be able to evaluate and promote this agent to being a better version of it. And then you have an API that sits in front of it so that everyone that's previously hitting this like agent for this set of tasks is now getting this new, better, improved version. And having that, the CI/CD and the DevOps, they're starting to kind of come together, you know, like some of these best practices and tools. And then you can start experiment like, oh, like, for example, you can get these out of the box tools from like third parties, but you might create your own functions that are wrappers on top of them. So if you want to say, oh, like I want to have this specific tool for doing portfolio analytics, we focus a lot in asset management. So opposed to relying on maybe your portfolio analytics provider, whether that's like an Infusion or a Lightkeeper or Arcana, maybe you want to write your own Python function that wraps those for some cases, but then you do additional type of analytics based off of the query, and then you register this tool within that agentic loop, run the evals, and see if it actually got better or worse. Or you want to change your prompt in how you're actually describing the way that you want to break down your book, whether it's a primary analyst or a fund or a strategy, and better define that, and then run it within the evaluation system and see if the score got better. So you can start determining how you can actually make the system better by improving the tools or changing the context. And that's kind of the two levers that you primarily have to pull there. I mean, the tools can also be like, oh, better memory management or better history storage. But it's basically like a better tool, better context. And then there's obviously like the language model. You can A/B test that as well. So that's the third. But like me as a developer, I'm more application focused. So I don't focus on reinforcement learning or fine tuning. I think there's definitely a role for that within this workflow. But there's so much low hanging fruit that once you have a framework to do that evaluation, pull those two levers, that you can go pretty far. And we're now at the point where like these things are starting to work. They're starting to move to prod. They're starting to actually be common denominators across different workflows. Because that's one of the hard things with the first generation of some of these agentic frameworks, that you had to do all of this context engineering yourself. Like you had to use the assistant chat kind of interfaces and run your own RAG pipelines. And it was just a lot of work. And each one of those pipelines wasn't transferable from one problem to another. But with these generalized agentic loop systems, one of the biggest things that you're offloading is the context engineering. Like before, you had to make all of the calls and construct all the context yourself. Now you're relying on the model to call out to the tools to construct a better context for the next thing that it has to do. And the agentic loop is actually doing the context engineering that you previously kind of had to customize with the first generation of some of these agent tools. And what that's allowing for is kind of the scalability of the implementation of the same agentic frameworks across completely different problem spaces. And we're kind of just at that point. And it's kind of cool to be and like, that's when we were talking earlier about like, how much do you then want to invest in the infra around this now that we're starting to get to the point where this commonalities are starting to emerge? Because once you have these kind of core substrates, these core components, there starts to be like standardization and homogenization of the different types of tools that the hyperscaler is going to provide around it, because it's now going to be so obvious.
But once like that entire stack, and by the way, I want to ask you about that, because you were saying something that I keep reflecting on in New York. You were saying the eval is the product.
Yeah.
And I think what you describe is the articulation of that statement. So maybe we come back to that in a second. But I want to go back to this like capital allocation conversation as a founder. And if your advantage is speed, then by time that, let's just say that end-to-end workflow that you just described becomes a standard, right? In some shape, right? You make one function call and the whole thing works. Then it's a commodity. There's no competitive advantage in building that. You've had to invest time, energy, money and to create something that doesn't currently exist, which gives you an advantage in the market. As soon as that turns into AWS and I can access it through the API, it's a commodity. And that's what's happening like in this entire space, is that this commoditization of the components of all the stuff that interacts within this ecosystem is happening so fast. It's not that like the models themselves are, yes, the models are improving very quickly, but it's everything around the models to support that brain, all the infrastructure, the evals, the agent loops, all that stuff is happening so quick, it's commoditizing. And that's something that you got to dwell on as a founder. Like you've got finite resources. Like, do you take the risk of your infrastructure becoming commoditized in 6 months, or do you build it now? I think that becomes a risk. Like if what you built turns into MCP, like if you go all in on some, or A2A, right? A2A hasn't captured the imagination like MCP, but like, let's say you go all in on developing some agent protocol that communicates with tools. And then all of a sudden Anthropic's like, MCP. That's a problem. But I think the infrastructure build, the pipelines, the end-to-end stuff that you're talking about here, you have a good chance that Anthropic is not just going to drop some infrastructure component on the node and it's just going to disappear.
Totally. And for me, I love that. I love the idea that somebody else is going to come and solve my problems so that I can focus more on solving the problems of my clients. And so if that is a problem for you as a founder, I would be curious what your motives actually are, that the problem that you're trying to solve to help somebody else is no longer a problem for you, and therefore you question your existence. Because are you really caring about your clients if that is something that you're worried about? And my argument is that you're not. You actually have this ulterior motive where you kind of want some out. Does somebody come in and buy something from you for more than what it cost you because you were able to trap somebody else into some system? And I think that that is oversimplification. I don't think that that is fair because that's not necessarily the motive. But if you're overly afraid of that, I think that you aren't keeping your eye on the ball and focusing on what matters.
Yeah, well, it's like human nature too, right? Sunk cost fallacy. I spent 6 months building a thing, and now I can go push a button and get that thing. Like I am feeling pain because of all this time, energy, and attention. I thought my solution was the beautiful solution, and now it's not. So it's human nature as well. And as a founder, you have to go through all sorts of very, very difficult psychological things, including just all these biases that we have as human beings. I think that's a big part of it too.
Totally. But if you're riding that wave, right? If you're leaning forward and you're always just kind of one step ahead of where that wave is coming behind you and you're falling forward, that your ability while you're leaning in to provide value for people that are just not able to spend the mind share on the problem space and help translate it to them, that your opportunity to have orders of magnitude higher value proposition than what you would have had without this scalability that intelligence provides you, for me, is enough of an opportunity that I don't have to worry about that moat. I'm riding this massive wave and I'm leaning the fuck into it. And I know that if I'm doing that, there's no way that I can lose if all I care about is just trying to add as much value for the people around me and the clients that are like giving me their trust, and as a function of that, their resources and money, that if I just try to scale and lean into that as hard as I can, there's no way I don't come out the other end of this pipe and look back on it and say, there's one hell of a journey.
I agree. Like 100%. Like there's no other option.
Right. That's another thing. What are you going to do? Fall into the pipe and get like washed away?
Yeah. Are you just going to repackage a LangChain and like put a wrapper on top of it and go sell that to somebody? Like, no, you got to like be 45 degrees forward into the wave. I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think what you're talking about is exactly that. Speaking of, like, eval as a service. Let's talk about that. That was a very provocative thing you kept saying in New York, but I want to hear what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, it was more of the eval is the product. You get your eval as the product. We could do eval as a service, but because of the replicability of this intelligence, like you can snapshot this intelligence at a point in time, and generally speaking, with similar inputs and similar context and similar tools, with the right constraints, it's going to have a consistent level of scalable output, as though you could hire hundreds of different humans to redo that same work. And so if you can use an evaluation to demonstrate that this agentic loop with a combination of context, tools, and models can solve these set of problems in a well-defined set of evaluations, you own that space. You own that problem. And then you can then take that and sell that solution to anyone that's willing to buy that. That would say, like, that would help me solve that problem. And what is the actual product? Like, the product is the evaluation and demonstrating that you can do that. And so the evaluation is the representation that you've solved the problem. And so the more problems that you're capable of solving and the value that those solutions provide to the people that are experiencing those problems that you can demonstrate within evaluations, like that is the product. And or at least that's a demonstration that you can go and do the thing. Now you can go and have to deploy it and manage it, but the hard part of all of that is demonstrating that you can actually produce something good. And that is, yes, you have to build the evaluations, you have to write the tests, you have to say what the results are, you have to evaluate how it came up with the answer. So just because it's coming up with the correct answer, if you go underneath the hood and it's doing all these crazy SQL queries and inefficient methodologies and pathways, like you also have to evaluate, did it come up with the answer through like the correct path? But if you can do all of that, that's demonstration that you have harnessed this intelligence with a combination of tools and context to solve this problem. And you can do that infinitely at scale. Like you can, if as long as you figure out the DevOps, you've solved this problem. You own it. This is your problem space. You own the solution here. There's nobody that can refute it. Check out the evaluations, assuming that your evaluations are correct. And that is the product. Like that is the demonstration that you have harnessed this genie in a bottle, constrained it to a specific problem space. Say, hey, I can't solve world hunger, but I can solve parsing an Excel model based off of how you've currently structured it and pull out your price targets consistently every single time. I can be able to get a transaction in your accounting system that's gone through an exception that wasn't able to correctly tag. Was it a interest accrual? Was it a dividend payment? Was it a buy? Was it a sell? Was it a fee from a broker? That you can demonstrate within your eval framework, you are able to capture and solve all of those. You've solved it. Like you own that problem now. And so it's the evaluation framework that's the demonstration of capability and competency of owning that problem, that is more powerful than anything else that I've seen, and which is why we focus a ton on show me the evaluation, demonstrate for me we're able to capture and solve this problem with this intelligence. And if you can do that, good. All right, you've done it. Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's like a really fundamentally different way to think about like product market fit or go to market, and even like thinking about proving that you can solve a problem. It's like it hits it on different dimensions, right? And it makes me think of like, as you're talking about evals, right? Basically with an eval, you're trying to remove the variability and probabilistic nature of an LLM. You're trying to remove that and make it deterministic, which kind of makes me think like, how far do you need to go to remove the essence of the model to make it useful, right? And inside of that end-to-end eval pipeline that you're describing, like you're using the stochastic nature of the model, you're reasoning about the model, you're reasoning, but you're kind of narrowing that distribution of potential outcomes down to the point where there's only one right answer. And what I'm assuming here is that the implication is you can't get to that right answer any other way. And this kind of goes back to my distribution, like new pockets of business value, new problems to solve because we have this new powerful technology. If that's true, then what we're saying is like there is no other way to solve this particular problem set in the current state of technology that we have, except with this new LLM reasoning agentic loop workflow. And not only that, but I can prove to you that it works so that this problem is solved and it used to not even exist in the minds of an executive.
Yes. Although the only thing I would mildly tweak on that is saying that this is the only way to solve this problem, because there's different pathways a model can go through and different tools and different approaches. But there are ways that you can measure its efficacy. One, what is the total cost and token consumption throughout this entire agentic workflow? So one thing that's really nice with the Claude Agent SDK, that after it goes through a loop, it'll tell you total tokens consumed, total price paid, total cash hit, total number of turns, and you would capture that in the eval. And so maybe what you're trying to optimize for in two different approaches, both right answer across all the evals, well, which one's cheaper? And if we now want to swap out the underlying model, is it giving us the same accuracy and efficacy for this set of problems at a cheaper cost per token? And so that's just, you might swap the model. But you might also want to be looking at, like, let's say you have to query a couple different databases as part of that agentic loop. Maybe the cost isn't in tokens, but your Snowflake query that you're writing under the hood is completely unoptimized. And so then the total cost of ownership is something that is outside just that agentic loop. You have to be looking at like, oh, well, how much is it costing me in on-demand compute services, whether it's Snowflake or calling out to a Lambda, that it cost me in order to execute this. And then lastly, it could be like, well, what if you're writing a bunch of, it's going down this pathway that when you look at it, it's very suboptimal. And so that suboptimal nature tends to cause more unnecessary entropy. So even though it is passing your tests, the level of entropy that it's going or that it's creating in terms of the path that it's getting there is something that you want to correct, even though the results are right. And so other than that, yeah, I did what you just said resonated a ton.
Yeah, fascinating. Folks struggle with the eval stuff. I think it's critical, right? Because like if you've got the frontier model and you're paying $8, $10, $12 gallon tokens in before out, like if you can get the same result with a off the frontier, what do you call like what do you call the model that's not the frontier model?
Cheap. I don't know.
Off the run?
Off the run. I like that. Yeah, an off the run model. I'm going to use it now.
Off the run model? Yeah. So an off the run model, like you can collapse the cost to pennies. And if you have the evals right, then you can get the same results with a cheaper model, and then you're in the money.
Yeah, exactly. Dude, Jason, can't wait to when we actually get to do this in New York, man. Also, not before we leave, we both had a 312 number. I'm assuming you then are from Chicago. I was texting you earlier. 312. We didn't talk about that.
We didn't talk about that. Were you in Chicago?
I'm originally from Michigan, but when I moved to Chicago in 2014, I switched to a Chicago cell phone number, and I've had it ever since. So I lived in River North for a while, and then moved to actually Hong Kong briefly in 2019, and now back in New York.
Okay. Yeah. I grew up in Chicago. I moved to London for 2 years in 2013, and then did 8 years in Singapore, and came back 3 years ago. And now I live in beautiful Denver. Well, the suburbs of Denver, but it is still very beautiful.
Awesome, man. Well, hopefully you get some time out in the mountains in wintertime. Do you Epic or Icon?
That's a great question. I do Icon.
Nice.
Yeah. The only thing I do for recreation is ski 6 months of the year and go exercise like 3-4 times a week. Otherwise, I'm sitting in front of the computer grinding on trying to keep up with this fire hose.
Yeah, man. Well, it's good that you're able to take a breather occasionally. How many days do you get in a year on the mountain?
Skiing?
Yeah.
I only started skiing 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, I did the lessons, and then last season we hit it pretty hard, and I got like pretty good. Like I was doing blues, like no problem. did it start to hit black. So we go out on it 20 times a year.
Dude, that's awesome. Like that's
An hour. Like my brother-in-law lives in Aspen, so we have like some of the most epic world-class skiing like within 2 hours away.
Oh, I lived in Aspen during COVID. Like I went out there for a summer and when it was shut down, and I'd been a couple times to the mountain and Snowmass for the winter, but the summer, oh my goodness, I was sold. I was not ready to leave when I finally left that place, but it was it's special. The mountains are special.
Yeah, it is. I'm like, my wife calls me an indoor cat because I'm a computer person. I sit in front of the computer and just work, but I'm trying to like force my way out to this outdoor lifestyle that we're paying for. And yeah, miles are great. I agree with you.
Awesome, man. Hey, well, with that, dude, Jason, thanks so much for coming on. And for everyone else on the episode, I'm your host, Michael Watson. This is the Hedgineer Podcast, talk about technology, data, and AI. Follow us on YouTube. We post a lot on LinkedIn. You can follow Jason on PyQuant News. Check him out on Twitter. He posts a lot of really good stuff on LinkedIn as well. And we also publish these episodes to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. We try to push this stuff out there. So until next time, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.